Let's dive right into this explainer. Today, we're taking a really close look at a 14-month mystery that practically suffocated the foggy little town of Millbrook Hollow. And we're not talking about physical violence here. No, this is honestly a masterclass in the sheer horror of forced intimacy and unrelenting surveillance. The target? The Calloway family at 7 Alder Hollow Lane. And the perpetrator? Well, that's an unknown entity who simply goes by the Watcher.
I am not here to frighten you, only to say that I see you, and I have for longer than you know. Sleep well, I always am. Just let that sink in for a second. That absolutely chilling sign-off comes from the very first letter the Calloways received on January 3rd. It instantly sets this tone of absolute dread, right? There's no overt threat of physical harm. It's just the terrifying, undeniable proof that someone, somewhere, is watching them. So let's take a look at the stage where all this psychological terror actually plays out.
Which brings us to our first section, the house and the family. To really grasp how this stalker pulled off such impossible access, we have to look at the physical space itself, because the architecture of 7 Alder Hollow Lane is basically a main character in this story.
The property is known around town as Maplecrest. It's a Victorian farmhouse built way back in 1897, right up against a dense pine forest. Now, the key feature of Maplecrest is this widow's walk up on the roof. It gives you a crystal clear, unobstructed view of the front gate and the tree line. It is literally the ultimate vantage point for a watcher. Throw in a hemlock hedge that's thick enough to easily hide a person, an outdoor motion light that is always mysteriously malfunctioning, and a locked, entirely unexplored basement crawlspace, and you've got a property that feels tailor-made for hiding. Seriously, imagine trying to sleep in your own house knowing all these blind spots are just waiting in the dark right outside your bedroom. Inside the house, the psychological toll is fracturing the family into two completely different directions. On one hand, you've got Daniel, the dad. He's a methodical shop teacher, so his gut instinct is to try and control the physical environment. He's locking up his tools, constantly securing the space, basically looking for a padlock for every problem. But on the other hand, there's his 16-year-old daughter, Priya. She is super skeptical about any of the local supernatural rumors. Instead, she tackles this whole nightmare analytically. She actually starts a notebook to track the exact dates, times, and even the lunar phases of the letter drops. So while Daniel is trying to lock the thread out, Priya is actively trying to crack the pattern.
Moving on to our next section, 7 letters, escalating dread. To really appreciate the terrifying craft behind this mystery, we have to trace how these letters evolved chronologically, because the tone shifts so drastically over those 14 months.
Looking at the timeline, you can see exactly how the panic builds. It kicks off on January 3rd with a letter just slid under the front door. Creepy for sure. By February 14th, the watcher casually mentions looking down from the widow's walk. But the real turning point, the moment where this goes from unsettling to just absolutely terrifying, is March 30th. Letter 4 wasn't found outside. It was found folded up inside a closed book sitting on a bookshelf inside the locked house. The perimeter was completely breached. And from that day forward, the stalker's knowledge becomes invasively, horribly intimate.
Take the second letter, for example. The stalker writes, "Renata said the roast needed more rosemary. Priya laughed with her mouth full and got scolded for it." The stalker isn't just creeping around looking through windows anymore. They are literally eavesdropping on the mundane, private mechanics of a family dinner. It's this suffocating observational intimacy that makes you instantly want to go check your own deadbolts.
But then, by May 1st, the horror pivots from physical stalking to this impossible psychological knowledge. This is where the sheer craft of this whole mystery really shines. The watcher casually names Renata's mother Colleen. The thing is, that name had never been spoken publicly. The threat isn't just, "I can see you eating dinner" anymore. It's changed to, "I know your deepest family history and I have been watching for generations." That leads us into suspects and buried secrets. Naturally, the local police were involved by this point, but as they dug deeper, a newly uncovered family secret completely blew the timeline of this case wide open. Get this. On June 30th, Renata's aunt, Miriam Voss, who was the previous owner of Maplecrest, makes a stunning confession from her assisted living facility. She admits that back in the 1970s, she received the exact same kind of letters. She never told a single soul, she just burned them all, hoping the nightmare would go away. So suddenly, this single confession forces everyone to look decades into the past for the culprit. This wasn't a new obsession at all, it was a very, very old one.
Which brings us to our suspect board. First, we have Ellis Farrow, the overly friendly neighbor across the hollow. He owns high-powered binoculars and a trail camera setup he claims is just for foxes, though he conveniently refuses to hand over the footage from the exact week those cameras allegedly malfunctioned. Then we've got Sergeant Okonkwo, the highly competent but incredibly frustrated local cop who has absolutely zero usable physical evidence to work with. There's Tabby Reyes, Priya's 17-year-old classmate who was caught lurking near the property for a so-called school project. And finally, there's Corwin Hale, the owner before Miriam, a man who died in 1988 and who local legend insists never actually left the house willingly. Every single one of these suspects has a motive, but every single theory has a massive, glaring hole in it.
Okay, let's talk about the impossible physical evidence, because this is the exact moment this explainer pivots from a standard, grounded true crime stalker case into something deeply, fundamentally unsettling.
The mystery goes completely off the rails with the handwriting. See, the Watcher's letters are penned in this neat, old-fashioned cursive, using standard blue-black fountain pen ink. Well, when investigators checked the town archives, they found old grocery lists and letters written decades ago by Corwin Hale. The handwriting is a striking, near impossible match. But remember, Corwin Hale died nearly 40 years ago. So how on earth is a living stalker today writing with the exact penmanship of a dead man?
And then comes Letter 7 on July 15th. It directs the family straight to the old third-floor nursery. On August 1st, following the letter's instructions, they pull up a loose floorboard and find a hidden tin box. What's inside? A photograph of a woman in 1970s clothing, a child's hand-drawn picture of the house, and a single key that fits absolutely no known lock in Maplecrest. This physical evidence doesn't point forward to some modern-day stalker. It points violently backward in time. So, let's break down the 4 theories of the Watcher. How do we even begin to tie these impossible threads together? Based on the source case files, we can weigh 4 competing theories. Theory 1 is grounded in reality: the living Watcher. This suggests a human stalker, maybe someone like the neighbor Ellis Farrow, is using long-range optics, an intimate knowledge of the property, and deep dives into town archives to deliberately fake a supernatural haunting. They're basically just exploiting the house's layout and historical gossip to terrorize the family. Theory 2 is the inherited secret. This posits that Miriam Voss knows way more than she's actually admitting. In this scenario, the letters are part of a multi-generational cover-up kept alive by Miriam's silence, maybe protecting a hidden relative or an old associate of Corwin Hale, who has just been obsessively watching the property for decades. Theory 3 leans right into the impossible, the haunting. We have to at least acknowledge the supernatural reading of the evidence here. The matching cursive from 1988, the impossible access to a closed book in a locked room, the hidden tin box, it all suggests the old local legend is actually true, that the letters aren't from a living hand at all, but from a ghost demanding his history be remembered. And finally, Theory 4, the copycat. This means Miriam's 1970s letters were totally real, written by a human stalker back then. But today, someone in the present, maybe Tabby Reyes, maybe even one of the Calloways themselves, is just mimicking that toxic tradition. They might be doing it deliberately, or maybe through some delusional belief that they actually are the Watcher. As we wrap up this explainer, we are left staring at the unresolved physical anomalies of Maplecrest itself. We know that letters detailed the nursery floorboards, but what on earth is hiding in that locked basement crawl space that has never, ever been fully explored? And what about that unmatched key from the tin box? What does it actually open? It is so wild to me that the most crucial piece of physical evidence in this entire mystery still lacks a corresponding lock. And that brings us to perhaps the most grounded yet terrifying detail of all. Beneath the widow's walk window, right there in the flower bed, police found a single size 10 work boot print. It matches absolutely nothing owned by any named suspect. So I'm going to leave you with this final thought. If Corwin Hale is long dead and Ellis Farrow's boots don't match, who exactly was standing outside the window?